Okay, so when we look at the syllabus content for business plans, you could get anything from simple knowledge questions, which would be name the main components of a business plan, and it might tell you how many to name, or you might be expected to explain the purpose of a business plan, so that would be worth a couple of points, maybe as much as 4. So why do you think businesses do it? I think it's much more likely that you'll be asked to evaluate the importance of a business plan, and it's highly unlikely that they'll use the word business plan. They might just ask you to consider whether or not business planning is successful. So it's like almost putting a little tweak on it before you begin. And then you might get identify, it's only identify, so it's got to be name a couple of things, the main sources of information and guidance available to entrepreneurs. So that's just very much a knowledge content. Okay, so only one key term in this section of the syllabus for you to put into your vocabulary book. Okay, so it's easy to try and split the purposes of a business plan into benefits and problems. So if we start with the benefits then, one of the early sections of a business plan is asking you to clarify objectives. Now you've got to think to yourself, well, why is that a benefit to the business plan then? Because by writing down some objectives, it's likely that you'll have to consider every area of the business idea, so from all perspectives. And that means that because you've identified it from a various point of views, it's much more likely to be successful. Again, some of the elements are very specific, so it helps you to know precisely what needs to be done. So some of the topics that you might come, it might simply be, will you meet your business objectives or not? But it could include things like targeting specific customer groups, so knowing who your target market is and ensuring that you adequately enter that. You could think about how you want to price your product so that it's appropriate in the marketplace and it will be competitive. You could think about the costing side of your business, so to make sure your costs aren't overinflated so you won't ever break even. It's likely that it will ask you to look at your sales forecast, so you could look at seasonality elements, or it could look at the small build-up of your product, and then any other area of marketing that might need to be considered, the distribution element, or how you're going to place it. Are you going to be on an electronic market? Are you going to be face-to-face? If you look at the money element of this business idea, it's likely that you might have to persuade lenders to invest capital, and lots of business banks will ask to see the business plan, not just before loans, but in order to get your overdraft up and running as well. Now, my last point for my benefit is I've written it's a valuable tool to help the running of a business. Students often have this misconception that you only write a business plan to get money from your bank manager and then you don't do anything with it. But it's important actually to use it as I've documented where I would like to go in the future and how I think I'm going to get there. And when I come against obstacles, I might have already pre-planned for them, or I might be so successful that I actually get to that point, and then I might have to actually update my business plan so that I accommodate all my business changes, and that can include internal changes in the business and external changes. When we consider the problem areas then, it's very likely that you'll say, oh, I'll only think about the positives in my business planning. Actually, it's very important that you're accurate and realistic. So you need to consider if there's going to be any threats to the business. So if you're setting up in a highly competitive marketplace, what are your competitors doing? How are you going to ensure that you combat against that? Also, what about any weaknesses? If you start up just as a sole trader, you won't know everything about everything. And so it's likely that you'll need to acquire skills or experience from somewhere else. Most businesses, before they begin, don't research their costs enough. They just put a ballpark figure, and so it's likely that in your financial parts of the business plan, you'll probably underestimate costs. And so it's actually important that you have almost like a rainy day fund, a contingency fund, in order to accommodate these costs that could be unexpected. Now, realistically, I think you're going to be very optimistic about your view. You know, you're a new business, you might not have any proven customers, you might have not much, an awful lot of experience, so you will be optimistic about your sales forecasts, and you'll be over optimistic about when your customers are going to pay you. And so an important part of business planning is to actually acknowledge that there's probably going to be a time delay. You're going to have this contingency element and be brave enough to see it through. You might be sitting there when I tell you that there's only one more slide to go with this, thinking, oh, I don't know anything about business planning. But actually, in reality, all of these topics, all of the content of the business plan is taught somewhere else in the syllabus. And so you need to be on the ball with every topic that we're going to cover between now and the exam, and think to yourself, is this in the business planning? When I get a question about planning, will I be able to use it? Okay, so this was the part I actually asked you. Go away and research the content of a business plan, because this will give you some idea about what's in it, so that we can see the other areas of our of the syllabus and how they fit in with this. So, what kind of things do you need to plan about when you're starting a business? So we'll have some details about the business to start with. That could be your trading name, it could be your location, it could be your legal structure, and it'll probably give some short description of a product or a service, or the products and services that you intend to sell from your business. The second section then will be some personal information. So I might want to know who you are as the owner. Will you be managing the business? Do you have any business skills, experience and financial commitments that perhaps might stretch you in this? You could write something about if you're going to get help from anybody, so if you're going to have support. So in the section that says, where else can I get help and support, you could perhaps link that together. Now we've done objectives. What am I going to say is my first word? They've got to be smart objectives. So it's not just the fact that you want to minimise your costs. You've got to be indicative. How are you going to minimise your costs? Or if you're going to make a profit, what is the time span? And what is the number that you're looking for? Now here's where we get a little bit more difficult then. So I already know that you've started learning some of the marketing bits on the other side of the syllabus. So you've got to consider, what is a marketing plan? So as a little bit, you might tell me which bit of the market are you entering. So is it gap, and is that the reason why you've started up your business? You could perhaps tell me about some market research and if you've got any results that you've done. So have you done any research firsthand, or are you using some research that you might have found out on the internet? You could maybe tell me about your market. So is it a physical market or is it an e-commerce market? How big is the market? Is it growing or is it quite stable? You could perhaps tell me about your customers. So their age, their gender, their income, what is the price that they're willing to pay. You could, in the marketing plan, think about your competitors, and have your competitors got any strengths and weaknesses, and how could you combat those things. You could try and tell me about how your product or service is unique. You could try and tell me if you think you're going to carry out any promotion. Now remember, you probably won't have very much money to start with, so don't be ambitious and say that you're going to have a TV advert. You could try and tell me about the sales methods, the sales techniques that you think that you might include. When we look at the production plan then, it's nice and easy if you're actually going to make something. If you're going to make something, you could tell me about what materials you'll need, what kind of staff you're going to need, if any. Will you need to have any equipment? And you could try and think about what kind of scale of production are you going to consider. How many will you be able to make each day or each week or each month? Now, not everybody will produce their product. You might just buy in goods from a wholesaler and then sell them in a retail environment, or you might just have a service. So let's say, for instance, you were a gardener, you would consider what elements. So if you were cutting somebody's grass, you put an estimated time on it. If you were pruning some rose bushes, you put an estimated time on it, and that would help you almost do the equivalent of a scale of production. When you plan your business then, I don't really want to know about all the nuts and bolts that you're going to buy. But actually, I do want to know about something that are called fixed assets. And that would be things like premises and equipment. It's almost like all of the things you use in order to produce your product or sell your product. Now, there'll be lots of different choices there, because obviously we don't need to buy premises or equipment or a vehicle or machinery. We don't need to buy those outright. So you could just say to me, I'm going to need these. Actually, I'm going to rent them or lease them. And that way, it won't be such a substantial outlay to start with. Now, staying with that idea of how much money do I need, I'm going to try and produce some financial forecasts. So it's likely that I'm going to look at a sales forecast. So how many of your product or your goods do you think you're going to sell over time? From that, I should be able to say, well, this is what I think my cash flow forecast will be. And you want to know about the money that you think you're going to come having flowing into the business. So that's from my sales. There's how these two link. But also I'll need to look at, well, what about any commitments and bills that I have to pay? And then we're going to go on to the more complex things that are so more accounting documents, and we'll look at projecting our profit and loss account and our balance sheet for the business. And these have got to be very detailed so that people can say to you, I think you've overestimated this, or I think you're being unrealistic. Now, it's likely that one of the reasons you might have done this is because you needed some finance. So we have a few different options. We could look for a partner or look for someone to invest in our business. We could typically go to the bank and ask for a bank loan, and there'll be different elements that you could research there. Or it might just be that you need a little overdraft to start you off, because you know after a while the money is going to flow into your business. Now, I've got a posh word here. So what collateral are you going to offer? So let's say, for instance, if you want to borrow money, it's likely that the bank will need some security. Now, a lot of people start up in business and they operate from home, or maybe they just rent premises, and that makes it much easier. But if I'm going to invest some money, it's easy to say, I'm going to borrow some money for a car, because actually the collateral or the security for that loan is the car. So if you fail to make the repayments, I'll just repossess your car, and then I'll be able to sell it, and I'll be able to get a large proportion of my money back. I want you to think about the long-term plans for your business. So it's a brief section, because we can't look into a ball and look to the future. So you've got to be quite realistic, 2 or 3 years, maybe 5 years in advance. And as you produce more plans for the business, you should get better at doing this. Now, the last thing we might do is we might produce something called a SWOT analysis. So SW stands for strengths and weaknesses, and so these are internal to the business. Then we have opportunities and threats. They're outside the business. So it's usually about the environment outside. So we want to use our strengths to exploit the opportunity, so maybe the gap in the market or something like that. And we would like to reduce our weaknesses in order to try and overcome any threats. It's to really try and make you a stronger, more rounded business and provide you with the best opportunity. Now, when you start up in business, it's really got to remember that it's challenging, you'll make difficult decisions, you might not have anybody to support you, you might have to make the decisions on your own, and realistically, you've got to look at every source of information or every offer of guidance as they know better than me, so maybe I should listen to them and get some advice. So sometimes there's small business advisory services, and a lot of them are very local. It might be people who are already in business that'll perhaps offer you some advice on your market or what kind of pitfalls that you might have. Obviously, as soon as you open a business bank account, the banks could offer you some advice. They've often got small business advisors within the banks. Your accountant might be able to give you some advice, how to specifically about your finances and about, how to overcome the startup amount of money that you need, and perhaps if you want to expand in the future. We could look at Business Link. So that's a government funded service, and they're supposed to give you information, advice and support to start, maintain and grow your business. They'll direct you towards people. They'll perhaps give you advice on trademarks, or if you want to export your product. Depends where you're thinking about going. Remember, they just direct you towards other people, and again, they might look to what kind of advisors. So maybe entrepreneurs who have become very successful, and they would perhaps help you in the future. Other local advice, you can have enterprise agencies. Again, they would be offering you maybe a link with a business mentor. We could go to the local chamber of commerce, or there might be trade associations. Depending on what age range you belong to, the Princess Trust can offer help and maybe some funding, but you've got to be within the age group of 18 to 30s. However, lately, they've actually got something called the Princess Initiative for Mature Enterprises, so as they recognise that many older people, because of circumstances such as being made redundant, so anybody over 50, they're unlikely to ever, they're going to struggle to get employment in the marketplace because they'll probably be quite expensive, but they'll have a wealth of experience and skills. And so it's nice that there's some help for that particular age range. They go under it's an acronym, it's called PRIME, so you could perhaps use that. But I've got to think that you might get very informal advice. So talking it through with friends and family, maybe people that you know from other people. A percentage of people will use that as a route in order to try and gain some more information and advice.